the tools you're going to need, it's a storm. The tools you're going to need is, I have needle nose pliers here. I have 3 different ones. Those are for the small turbo vacuum lines that I changed to silicone. Now, I'm changing a bunch of lines to silicone. One thing, you cannot use silicone where there's oil or gas fumes that will be present. So for emissions lines, you cannot. But these just, for the turbo lines, they just have air going through them. This one is going to be used for the 2 heater core lines. Coolant heater core lines. Then this is the 17mm one, a pretty long one, for the lower turbo line. Next, you're going to need a couple of extensions and a small ratchet for the clamps. So here they're a 7mm and 8mm, and this is to undo these right there for the air box. Then a short screwdriver and a long screwdriver, both flathead screwdrivers. So if you have a 98 or an 850, then there's only 8 coolant lines, and this video will cover those 8 coolant lines. That will cover all your lines. But if you have a 99, which is what I'm going to use to demonstrate on this video, there's 5 extra coolant lines that I will not be covering. The 3 for the PCV system and 2 for the oil cooler. Now this is a 98 here, as you may have seen. So yeah, enjoy the video. I hope you like the video. It's pretty long though, and also I don't think it's a great video. You can tell me if it's okay. It is my first video, so we'll see how that goes. I will have more videos that I will be bringing out on these cars. Now, before you touch the cooling system, make sure you do know that it is a pressurized system, which means that when it's warm, when it's at operating temperature, you cannot open this up. Otherwise, you'll have coolant that'll spray everywhere. So if you need to top it off, you do need to wait for the car to cool down before you could open that. Otherwise, you'll be burnt with very, very hot coolant. In this video, I'm going to show you how to change 8 coolant lines. If we start at my 98, then this is going to be the same as your 850. This car only has 8 coolant lines. So you have your 2 radiator lines, the 2 expansion tank lines, the 2 turbo lines. So there's one over here and one under the turbo, and the other one is the heater core lines. The other lines I'm going to change are also these lines. These are the turbo lines. I'm going to be showing you how to change all these lines on my 99. So in 99 they changed 3 lines compared to the 98. The 99 has a different expansion tank, so those 2 lines are different, and the lower turbo line is a little different. It's a little shorter, but not different at all from changing it from a 98. In the 99, they also added 5 more coolant lines, which I will not be changing. There is 3 PCV lines. That's why the 99 PCV can last much longer than the 98 or the 850. And then there's also the 2 coolant oil cooler lines, because the oil cooler was moved underneath the car. The oil cooler is no longer in the radiator. And then in 2001, so if we go to my 2002, here they changed it again. So the expansion tanks are the same as the 99, but the turbo lines are no longer rubber. They have changed them to aluminum. So those, you don't need to worry about changing those. But the radiator line's different, and from what I understand, the heater core lines are also different. Now, I haven't looked into the 2001 update because I just got this car, so that is why. Now, to change these, you're going to need some new lines. You can go with whatever lines you want, but if I go to my trunk, these are the lines I've decided to go with. I decided to go with do88 lines. These lines are made in Sweden. They seem to be pretty good quality. They're holding up very well in my 98. So I think I'm going to be putting them in here. Well, I don't think I am. So if you want to put these lines, I got all these lines, these 8 lines off of Viva Performance. And then here I got the expansion tank and the low level sensor. This will tend to fail and the light won't come on if you lose coolant. And all these clamps, I got all this off of IPD. Now these are the turbo vacuum lines. I've replaced them on my 98 GLT, and now it feels faster than my T5. That's not supposed to be like that. The other two, I also got these two clamps for the upper expansion tank line. I got these off of FCP. I'll try to link everything and put part numbers in the description, hopefully. And then I have coolant. So I decided to go with peak coolant. I would not use all-purpose coolant or that stuff they have. I would use the coolant that's made to go in your car, so that it has the proper additives for your car. All-purpose stuff tends not to be very good. The first line I'm going to start with is the lower turbo line, because that is the only line you have to get under the car for. And so what you're going to need for that, you're going to need the line, and you're also going to need some crush washers. So these are, you're going to have to disconnect the lower turbo aluminum line, so you will have to replace those crush washers. Now, since I'm starting with the lower one, this is the lower turbo line, but as you can see, this line is a perfect fit for an 850 or a 98, and for a 99 they changed it, so it's a little shorter, but you can definitely still fit this one on. A lot of people have fit that one on with no problem, so that I'm going to be fitting this one, since these lines this line is right next to the turbo. Definitely want to upgrade it to silicone. Now in clamps, I'll try to link everything down in the description, but I have different clamps everywhere. So these, I have this clamp that goes for the heater core lines and the lower expansion tank, and I also have these clamps on this line right here, and then I have these other clamps for this one, since this one is actually pretty difficult to put on. They have a shield here, it looks like, to protect it from these holes. Now there is also a lot of kits you can get, but these lines are thicker than the OEM lines, so they may not fit very well. The other thing is, don't use a clamp like this that has holes and is not protected. This will pinch your line and your line will fail, so you don't want to use these. Not the correct application for them. So if you look at all the clamps I have, they're not drilled through. These I really like them. They're also bigger than the OEM ones. That's really nice. And these are drilled through, but they do have a piece of metal here to protect them. I just have these for that little one, so that I can open them up all the way easily. And don't forget these when you're going to be removing it. Now I'm going to go under the car. The other question you may have is, do you need to replace all these clamps? It really depends. If there's a couple one-use clamps, so those you will have to replace them. But for example, my 98 was not an Arizona color, and all the clamps were just rotted out. They all needed to be changed. Now this car, this 99, is an Arizona car, so it's never seen the snow, but I'm still want to change them to these clamps. I'm going to be focusing on one side of the engine, so to focus on one side of the engine, there's going to be the lower turbo line, that one. Upper one will be later, the lower one, so I won't be using that one. The lower turbo line here, and if you see, it's bigger on one end and then smaller on the other, so I like to use the big clamps next to the turbo so that it's stronger and I don't have to worry about it. So then to do that, I use a socket and clamp it down on here so that it's the right size and doesn't risk to pinch it. Now to get to this line, we have to remove the short, to make it easier. You could do it without removing this, but it's much harder. You have to remove the short heater core line. So, what you're going to have to do is remove the air box and remove this line going to the turbo. Remember, I'm going to be replacing these lines with those other lines I showed you in the trunk. So you can see down there, it's a little hard to see. I'll show you again when I take it apart. But before you continue, you need to make sure that if you have a coolant leak, you need to find out where it's going, because a lot of times people won't change the coolant often enough, and the radiator will corrode and leak coolant into the transmission. Now the transmission fluid, this one is not very clean, but this one, it'll look a little bit like milk if it has water in it. Now I know this one is losing a little bit of coolant. This one's losing coolant into the heater core, so it's leaking inside the car a little bit. It's a very slow leak. I'll take care of that later. First, all this needs to come off. Okay, ignore this wire. That was for something else. It's no longer connected. Okay, so here I've removed it, and these are the turbo vacuum lines that I'm going to be replacing to silicone. As you can see, one is now disconnected. That's interesting. Okay, the first line you're going to want to remove is the short heater core line. So that connects. The lower one comes across and goes across here. Now that's the first one I'm going to change. Some interesting routing I'm seeing there. I don't think it was routed like that in this car, was it? No, it wasn't. Huh, okay. Okay, so changing the turbo vacuum lines is definitely a good idea, because I changed them on my 88, which is a GLT, and now it has much more power than this car. That doesn't make sense because this is a T5. Now on this side, I'm going to we're going to start with the lower turbo line. So let's go underneath the. Now at this point, I've already drained the coolant, so be careful when you drain the coolant. And when I'm going to undo the 17mm bolt that's right up here, it's difficult to see, because if coolant gets in your eyes, it can make you blind. So do be careful. Probably wear some safety glasses. So here, if you look here, you can see it right there. That's the first one. And on a 98 or an 850, the line would go all the way. But on here, they extended the aluminum to make it a little shorter. So there's not really that much difference. Another thing you may notice is that this clamp is facing the other way. So you have the lower heater core line that's in the way. The other thing is that the other clamp, the clamp on the other side of the aluminum line, that is a one-use clamp, so you have to remove everything. Well, apparently, all the coolant didn't come out when I drained it. Anyway, if we go to this line, we have to remove the air guide. Well, I hope you did that. Okay. So if we go here, you're going to need to use this. Now this clamp, since this car has never seen salt, looks fine, but I'm still going to be replacing it, because this is the line we're replacing it with. The clamps that I have are much bigger. They're bigger clamps. As you can see here, I'm going to get to this later. You have to cut this off here to reuse this piece to put it on this line, but that's not right now. Right now we're with the lower turbo line. So now that that's removed, and I put coolant everywhere, what's nice with the coolant is that it's actually very clear. But I removed the lower heater core line. As you can see, there are some cactuses back there. That was very painful. I could say thank you to the pack rats for that. Yep. And if you're wondering why this is all over the engine here, all over the wiring, this is for prevent them from eating it. Okay, so you can see, can you see it? Yeah, you can see it right here. Oh, yeah. Ah, there it is, right there. This is the line you're changing. So as you can see, this one has a one-use clamp, and this clamp is facing that way. So it's facing towards me to unscrew it. So that's why you can't just undo it from underneath the car. Now this aluminum line is I'm gonna take this off. We're gonna go under the car for that. But first, I'm gonna undo the clamp for that lower turbo line that's on the engine, and we'll go from there. Now there's this is the PCV system line. Be careful with this line when you take out the what is it called? When you take out this line here, because this, if you haven't done your PCV system, then this line's gonna be very fragile. You need to be careful with that. If you have a 98 or an 850, then there's gonna be two lines connected here. So be careful with that. I'm using a flathead screwdriver to undo all these clamps. That's pretty impressive. On my 98, all the clamps were just destroyed. I had to use quite a bit of force to get them to undo. But these are just coming off very easily. So now I've undone that clamp there, and now I can go under the car and undo the 17mm bolt. And we'll see what happens. There's a lot of pack rat stuff here. Now I don't have a torque rating for this bolt. I have coolant getting everywhere, but I don't have a torque rating for this bolt. All the way up there, I think you could see it. It's right there, right up here, right there. That's where it is. So that needs to. I don't have a torque rating for it. It's pretty difficult to undo. It is aluminum, so when you retighten it, you need to be careful not to over tighten it. Otherwise it'll break. I tend to get things not very tight. For example, my oil drain. Where is it? Maybe you can see it. It's leaking oil. I didn't make it tight enough, so I tend to not make things too tight. Now, I would make this pretty tight because you don't want this to leak. But again, it's aluminum, so be careful. Okay, so I've now removed it. Now, to get up here when you're removing your heater core line, what I like to do is put one knee on the plastic here and one knee on the aluminum of the engine here. Now I only weigh 140 pounds. I'm still growing, so I'm actually pretty small. But here you go. So you can get it as soon. The bolt's gonna be right here, right there. So I just removed it. You just get it loose from underneath, and then you can come to the top and finish it off. You can't get it from the top because it's too crooked. You can't really get a tool on it. So that's one crush washer right there. And I'm just going to remove it from the top and see how it looks like. After another flood of coolant, I'm not sure where all this coolant is coming from now. I drained quite a bit of it, so I don't know where it's coming from. Here is the line. Now, interestingly enough, this doesn't look right. I don't think this is the right line, because, no, that's not right at all. They definitely, this has the right part number for it, so I don't know. I don't understand. I don't know. Maybe this is for the GLT models, and they made it a bit longer. Now, this line is still a perfect fit for a 98 or an 850, but as you can see, for this line, it's a little too long, but it's really not that much too long. I would just have to trim it a little bit, and it would fit. And if you look at this clamp here, this clamp seems to be the same size of the clamps I want to put on, and it's in great condition. In my 98, it was not in great condition at all. It was disintegrating, and this is a one-use clamp here. Where did I? And if we go, I have this here. There we go. This is what connects right there. There we go. So there's one crush washer right in between there, and another one in between there. I think the other one fell under the car. So now I'm going to go ahead and pop this off. This, as you see, this is you can pop it right off with a screwdriver. It's a one-use clamp. And this new line is thicker than this line. So this line has dilated a little bit, and the lower turbo line if your car's getting high mileage, this is the first line that is going to rupture. And fortunately, when lines rupture, people continue to drive, and then they blow the engine. So yeah, so now I'm going to go ahead and put this one on. I'll come right back. Okay, so if you look here, there's a little bit of rust, but or corrosion. I think this is aluminum, I think. So, corrosion, on my 98, it was actually a lot worse. But my 98 does have 185,000 miles. This one only has 110,000 miles. So far, the only thing I can see that the previous owner didn't maintain very well is the transmission fluid was never changed during those mileage. Now, I think I'm going to go ahead and trim this. I'm not. Maybe I shouldn't. Maybe I'm not sure what I'm going to do. I'm either going to trim it or not trim it. Okay, so I'm deciding not to trim it because it slides on there pretty easily. It does leave a little hole there, but dirt might get there, but I think it'll be fine. Maybe maybe I should put another clamp here. No, I don't think it'll fit if I do that. So I think I'm not going to trim it. I'm just going to put it like this. And now it's just time to put it on the car. I have my two new crush washers. Now I only found one of the old ones. The other one fell somewhere. I'll probably find it eventually. But make sure you don't stack them because then it'll just leak. I'm making this video in tiny little pieces. It's probably very annoying to watch now. I hope not. So your first one is going to go there. I do think you know this, but if you don't, just like that. You're going to tighten and like that, and then it's going to seal. Okay, so I found the other one was under the car. You really want to make sure you don't stack it, because they'll leak. This, you have used this line to match up the other line, since silicone line ends right here, so you're going to have all that extra line that you have to get on the line for it to fit properly. And now, you can see it much better. Now, I didn't tighten down the clamps. I'm going to tighten everything down. But that looks really nice. Alright, so I'm decided to tighten these clamps from the top. I haven't tightened them yet, but because on my GLT, the 98, the turbo was smaller and there was enough room for it. But here, the turbo is bigger, and I don't like how close those clamps are to the turbo. Now this is the time before you tighten them to change your turbo vacuum lines. So the ones I went with were these. These are from IPD, and also get some new clamps because the old clamps, maybe they're probably fine, but I will change them anyway. Okay, now at this point, I faced these, the upper one on the bigger side of the small line. I faced it the same direction that the OEM line was on. And then the other side, I just faced it up like this. And with the GLT, with my 98, I was able to face it down. But this turbo is bigger, and so I didn't think it would be a good idea to do that. So that's how I set them up. I also changed all these turbo vacuum lines. And now next is the heater core lines. Now I would take the car off the ramps. So I'm going to start the car with nothing here, with all this missing. Now my GLT did run. My GLT ran pretty well, but I don't know how well this car's going to run with nothing. It'll probably run very poorly. But remember, there's no coolant in the car, so don't run it for too long. You'll, you don't want to blow the head on the engine. Where's my key? Here's my key. Okay. Okay, so I disconnected the battery because the fan wouldn't come off. That's very interesting. Now the 98s and also the 850s, well, my 98 ran pretty good without all this, but this, no, this car went crazy. Anyway, if you come here, next is going to be the heater core line. So here's heater core line. Now you have to cut this with a, I'm gonna use a Dremel. This is from my 98. I just cut this. Now I didn't cut this all the way through on this side because you don't want to nick the piece you're going to reuse. This is aluminum, so if you put enough, you just have to cut it all the way through, and then on this side you can break it with a screwdriver because it is aluminum, so you can easily break it. Alright, so I just cut this here. I just have to continue splitting it. I used the Dremel, and obviously wear a type of eye protection, otherwise all sparks go flying everywhere, so it's dangerous. Make sure you are careful when you cut this. You don't want to go all the way through. You don't want to go through the rubber because you're reusing this piece. As soon as I take this off, you'll see. Okay, so as you can see, I slid this off. Now this is very difficult. You have to grab. You need to grab. Now I forgot what these are called. Okay, well, you need to really twist it because it's been on there for so long that it's gonna be very difficult to take off. Now, as you can see, I touched it when I cut it, but I didn't go through it. Because you're reusing this, you're going to just put a regular clamp on here. Here is our new line. Looks much better. And it's exactly the same size, so that's good. Okay, now that those two lines are replaced, there's the long heater core line. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the lower radiator line that's in the way here. And I think this one's looks pretty easy to change on these cars, on the 98s and 850s. It's a little difficult to see, but the PCV system line passes there, and you have the secondary air injection system line that will tend to get in the way. So be careful not to crack that. Now on this car, it's been deactivated, so I didn't really care if I were to crack it, but if it's still on your car, make sure you don't crack that. Otherwise, you'll have to replace it, obviously. Okay. Okay, so I just pushed this out of the way, undid the heater core line that goes right into the side of the engine there. Used a 17mm to undo that. And now it's over here. So, this actually, I think that's the wrong way. There we go. Has the same shape. So again, I'm going to cut this, put this in, and then change the lower radiator line, and we can move on to this line over here. That line's very annoying to change. So now I put the lower radiator line. That's pretty simple to put in. I don't think I have to film that. Although it seems to be trying to push up a lot. I'll look at that, and now what I'm going to do is put back the air box and all the vacuum lines before I move on to this side here. And that line down there, the expansion tank lines. Those are very easy to change compared to all those other lines these other lines that are all down here and difficult to get to. Okay, it's now 2 days later. I did put these 4 coolant lines without recording it, so there's the upper radiator line. That one's really simple to change. Same thing with the 2 expansion tank lines and the expansion tank. The only one that's a little difficult is the one back here. Now that one, you do have to trim it if you want to get it on a little bit. So if we look here, that is how much I trimmed it. So the big piece, this much here, that made it the same length as the OEM line, and I trimmed it a little bit more. Now this line is much more rigid than this line, so this line you could slip it on and bend it pretty easily, but the silicone one you can't, so you do have to trim it a little bit more. Also, to make this easier to slip this on, I used this clamp, because you can open this clamp up completely. so that you can slip it on and then put the clamp on. Now to put it on, what you're going to want to do is slip it in towards the driver and then push it down until the point where you can push it onto the other side. This line is not very easy to put on, especially the silicone one. As you can see, it's a little, I've cut in it a little bit too short, but that's the only way I could find to get it on. So that's why it's a little short. Now these other lines, the lower expansion tank line, the upper one, that's very easy to change, so I didn't think I needed to record any of that. The other thing you do when you put all this together, you do want to make sure your low level warning sensor works. So I'll get to that in a minute. Okay, so this is the old lower turbo line here. You can see the shape of it, and I did check the part number for this one, and it does say that it is the correct one, but that just doesn't look right. It doesn't look right to me. It looks way too short. This line says that it fits from 99 all the way to 2004 on the Volvos, particularly on the P80 Sashi Volvos. So again, I'm not sure what's going on there. Also, make sure that you do replace all of your clamps. You definitely want to replace them. The previous owner of this car changed these two radiator lines. So these two radiator lines, I'm going to keep them. But whoever messed with it, there was no bolt head here. It just broke off. So I had to drill this one out. So I would say definitely replace all of them. You can see all the ones I used in this video. I used 4 different types of them. So that's just for the radiator line. These are for most of all the lines actually I used to. I will tell you in the description how many you need. But I used this for the lower turbo line, the 2 heater core lines, and the lower expansion tank line. And then this one was I just used 2 of these for that small line I showed you, and this is for the upper expansion tank line. In terms of coolant, you can go with what coolant you want. I went with the peak coolant. I mainly went with the peak coolant because it's blue. That's not a great reason to go with it, but it's a really good coolant. I had no problems with it. Now the next thing you're going to want to look is you want to make sure this is a new tank, so I don't need to worry about that. You should change your tank after your car hits over 20 years old, because then it's probably going to start leaking. It's probably going to crack. You're going to have problems with it. But you do want to check the level sensor. So to check the level sensor, or to make sure the sensor works, I take a screwdriver and push it down. Now that screwdriver is now pushing the float down. And now what you're going to do is just start the car. You want to do the same thing if you have a 98 or an 850. So here the float is off the side. So you're going to have to, it's a little harder to get. You may have to hold it or get a smaller screwdriver, but you just have to push it down. So what I would do is probably get another person to look inside and see if the light comes on with this car, because the screwdriver's not going to hold it with the design of this tank. But with the other tank it does hold, since the float is right there. So just push it down and then you can start the... Okay, so now you can see, make sure that light comes on. Oh, the key is stuck again. There we go. Okay. And there's the low coolant light. So now I know that it is working. You do want to make sure that works to prevent you from blowing the engine if you have a massive coolant leak. Especially since you just did the line, if you've never did them before, you do want to make sure that you get it right, so that one of your lines doesn't come off. So where did I get all this stuff? I got all the do88 lines from Viva Performance. For the turbo vacuum lines, I got those off of IPD. I also got all the clamps off of IPD, except for these two, this one and this small one right there. I got those off of FCP. Most of this, so 3 different websites. Now the difference with between a 99, what they changed, the only thing they changed is that lower turbo line is a little shorter, and the expansion tank lines are different. The expansion tank line is different. So if you did this on a 98 or an 850, then there's only 8 coolant lines. That's all. You've changed all of them, which this is this car, I've changed all of them, so that's all good. I would also recommend you do change your turbo vacuum lines, because those will tend to disintegrate over time, and you won't have a lot of power, but as soon as you change them, you'll get a lot more power. So if you look at all my old lines, there's 4 of them here. They're just disintegrating. I had to cut them off in little pieces because they wouldn't come off. Now this car was worse. It depends on the mileage. This car has 185,000, so those were just destroyed. This one only has 110,000, but they were not in good shape. Now, as soon as I changed them, I did drive the car around. The car drives much better, it runs better, and the acceleration is much, much better. So those lines were just leaking all the time. But in 99, there is 5 more coolant lines that they added. So in the PCV system, there's 3 lines. There's 2 lines underneath here, but you can't see them. And there's another line that's going to be in the back of the engine, out of the PCV system, back attaching into the engine. And the other lines are the oil cooler lines. There's 2 coolant oil lines going to the oil cooler underneath the car, because in the 98 model, the oil cooler's into the radiator, but in 99 they moved it out of the radiator. And I think that's it. Remember that, oh, one more thing. When you fill this up until it doesn't go down anymore. And once it's at the max, what you're going to do, you won't connect this line. You're going to squeeze this line, block this line off, and then release this line. And you want to keep doing that until the coolant stops going down. You'll get quite a bit of coolant in there by doing that. And the next thing, you're going to have to drive the car around. So what I did is topped it off, drove it around for 5 minutes, then came back, left it to cool, topped it off again because it was low, and then I drove it around again for 5 minutes, and topped it off because it got low again. And now I've drove it around, well, not now, but yesterday, and coolant has not moved, so that's good. The next thing you're going to want to do is check for coolant leaks. The only thing that you should worry about, assuming you did all the clamps tight enough, I do make these clamps probably a little bit too tight. This is silicone, so silicone is harder than the rubber that's on here. We'll be careful with that, but the only one I would be concerned about is this one. The one, if you get on here, the one on the turbo, the bolt you undid. If you don't make that tight enough, it'll leak. So make sure you do tighten that if you need to, if it's leaking, obviously. I think that's it. There's nothing else with this car. So right now, this car, the previous owner of this car the coolant was very clear. That's very good. There was no corrosion, no rust I can find. However, on this car, the coolant went over. I think that my parents probably just didn't change it often enough, since my parents did buy this 98 in 98. They bought it in 98 brand new. This one, I bought it off someone that it was also family owned, up until basically the mom drove it, and then the son got it. And this car, the only thing that was not maintained correctly is the transmission fluid. So make sure you stay tuned. I'll have another video on that and a bunch of other stuff. For example, what is this on top of my engine, and other things of those such. Make sure you do follow what I'm going to be posting, and thank you.